Somewhere around 2015, the games industry discovered a word. That word was service. And from the moment they discovered it, they could not stop saying it. Games as a service, live service games, service revenue, service model. The word spread from one earnings call to the next like a financial pathogen, infecting every pitch deck, every investor presentation, and every strategic roadmap in the sector. And I understand why. Because service is a beautiful word if you are trying to raise money. Services have reoccurring revenue. Services have retention metrics. Services have LTV, lifetime value, and DAU, daily active users, and all the other acronyms that make a financial analyst feel like they're looking at something they understand. Services, crucially, sound like software as a service, and software as a service is the most successful business model in the history of venture capital. It has minted more unicorns than any other structure in the last 20 or 200 years. So when a games company walks into a VC meeting and says, "We're building a live service game," what they are actually saying is, "Please apply your software as a service mental model to our product, price it accordingly, and write us a check." I am here as someone who has looked at this from the perspective of capital allocation rather than game criticism to tell you that this is one of the most successful acts of financial misdirection in the history of the entertainment industry. Games as a service is not a service. It borrows the language of a service to describe a product that shares none of a service's economic properties. And I'm going to go through exactly why, one structural failure at a time. Let's start with the definition because the entire argument hinges on it. What makes something a service in the economic sense? A service solves a pain point. It removes friction from a process that would otherwise cost the user time, money, or risk. And critically, if the service stops working, the client loses something material. Think about enterprise sales as a service. You subscribe to Salesforce. You manage your customer relationships, your pipeline, your sales data. If you stop paying for Salesforce, you don't just lose a software subscription. You also lose access to your data, your workflows, your integrations. Your sales team's productivity collapses. Obviously, when you don't pay the electricity bill or the utilities bill in general, you don't have water and you don't have electricity. Customers pay because the alternative is worse than paying. Now we're going to apply that logic to a live service game. If you stop paying for your battle pass, you just stop playing the game, or you continue playing the game because you can just do that. You don't lose any data, you don't screw over a workflow. There is no business process that fails. There is no material consequence to your life, your finances, or your professional obligations. In fact, if you stopped playing that game, it would probably increase all three. You just stopped playing a video game. There is zero cost of non-consumption. The entire premise of a recurring service revenue is that the customer is captured by the utility of the product. A live service game has no utility in the economic sense. It has entertainment value, which is a completely different thing. Entertainment can be abandoned at any moment without consequence. That is not a service. That is a hobby with a subscription attached, and those are obviously not the same investments. One of the foundational reasons software as a service works as a business model is that marginal cost approaches zero at scale. What the hell does that mean? I'm glad you asked. The 10,000th user of a software as a service product costs the company almost nothing to serve. The infrastructure is already built. The servers are already running. Each additional customer is nearly pure margin. Live service games do not work this way. To keep players engaged, and remind you guys, engagement is the entire premise of the model, you must produce a constant stream of content. New seasons, new maps, new characters, new storylines, new cosmetics. The content production never stops, because if it stops, the players leave. And here's the critical problem here. The marginal cost of the next season does not decrease. It stays high, and in many cases, it increases. Why does it increase? Well, there's two main reasons for it. The first one is asset complexity. As a game matures, its visual and technical standards rise. Players who have been playing for 3 years expect production values that match or exceed what they were seeing in year 1. The bar climbs continuously, so each subsequent content update has to meet a higher standard than the last, which means that it costs more to produce than the last. The second reason is also technical debt. Every live service game accumulates it, the spaghetti code. Every patch, every hotfix, every workaround for an edge case that couldn't be solved cleanly at the time, all piles up in the code base. After 2 to 3 years of live operation, a significant portion of every development sprint is spent maintaining and untangling existing systems rather than building new ones. The cost of producing the same volume of content rises as the game ages. You have built a factory where the marginal cost of every unit is higher than the last. In what universe is that a scalable business? The moat in a traditional software as a service business is built on switching costs. This is not a metaphor, it's a literal economic mechanism. The reason enterprise software customers don't leave is that the cost of leaving in time, in money, in disruption exceeds the cost of staying. Switching from Salesforce to a competitor requires data migration, retraining, rebuilding, and months of productivity loss. The product just has to be good enough relative to the pain of switching. Live service games have no switching costs. 0. A player can abandon a project that costs $400 million to build and move to a $10 indie game in seconds. You click the X button, you open the other button. The decision is frictionless, which means that for financial modeling is mostly catastrophic. LTV, lifetime value, is one of the most important metrics in any subscription-based business. It tells you how much you can spend to acquire a customer and still profit. Lifetime value requires some predictability on how long a customer will stay and how much they will spend. In a live service game, customer tenure is governed almost entirely by social dynamics and content velocity, two of the least predictable variables imaginable. A player doesn't leave because your product got worse, they leave because their friends left. They leave because a new game came out that their social group is playing. They leave because a streamer they watched stopped covering your game. None of these variables are in your model. None of them can be. LTV in a live service context is not a financial metric. It is a guess dressed up in Excel formatting. And the investors who funded the model based on projected lifetime value are now sitting with the write-downs that result from guesses. Here's a framing that almost never appears in games industry analysis, and it should appear in every single one. The total addressable market for live service games is not defined by capital. It is defined by time, specifically by disposable leisure time. The average person in a developed market has approximately 5 hours of leisure per day. That number does not grow. You cannot expand it through product innovation. You cannot increase it through marketing. The ceiling is fixed by the number of hours in a day and the proportion of those hours that aren't already consumed by sleep, work, and basic human maintenance. When a VC models a software market, they model revenue expansion, more customers, more spending, compounding growth. The TAM can grow as the category reaches new users or as existing users spend more. Gaming's total addressable market, in terms of the actual resource being competed for, is essentially fixed. What this actually means is that live service games are not competing for a share of an expanding market, they are competing for a share of a fixed resource. Every hour a player spends in your game is an hour they are not spending in a competitor's game. Every player your game acquires is a player some other game lost. Fortnite is the canonical success story of the live service model. And what Fortnite actually did is consume an enormous share of the available leisure hours in its demographic. It did not grow the numbers available. It captured them. For every hour of Fortnite, there were roughly 50 other live service games that did not get that hour. That is a resource extraction operation in a zero-sum market. You are not entering an industry when you launch a live service game. You are entering a war of attrition for a resource that cannot be expanded. And in a war of attrition, the winner is almost always the incumbent with the deepest pockets and the largest existing player base, which, incidentally, you are probably not. Live service monetization follows a distribution that makes the 80-20 Pareto principle look quite optimistic. The actual distribution in most live service games is closer to 99-1. Approximately 1% of players generate the majority of microtransaction revenue. The other 99% play for free or near free, generating engagement metrics but minimal direct revenue. This is presented in pitch decks as a feature. The free-to-play model maximizes the player base, which maximizes the social environment, which attracts and retains the paying players. The math works if the whales stay. The problem is that whale behavior is not a stable customer segment. It is not predictable, it is not replicable, and it is not acquirable through standard customer acquisition channels. They are a behavioral pattern that emerges from a specific combination of disposable income or not disposable income, psychological susceptibility to progression mechanics, and social investment in the game. You can't target a whale, you cannot reliably create more of a whale, and you absolutely cannot model their lifetime value because the same psychological profile that makes someone a whale in your game can make them a whale in someone else's game if the moment something more compelling appears, which is usually fat jugs. The departure of a small number of high-spending players can flip a live service project from profitable to write-off in a single quarter. This has happened. It has happened publicly with numbers reported in earnings calls, and it continues to happen. An industry where 1% of customers generate the revenue that sustains the other 99% is a high-variance gambling operation with the content production overhead attached. Here is a property of live service games that has no real parallel in software economics. Digital goods don't physically deteriorate. The game you shipped in year 1 still works in year 4. The servers still run. The content is still there. Maybe it's even added more content. By the metrics of a traditional project, nothing has changed. But the relevance has perished, and in a live service game, relevance is the product. The utility of a live service game, to the extent it has utility at all, is social. People play because other people are playing. The game is a venue, and venues only work when they are attended. When concurrent player count drops below a certain threshold, depending on how many players are needed to start a match, something happens that has no analogy in software economics. The social utility of the product collapses. The game does not break. It just becomes empty. An empty venue is worse than a closed venue because an empty venue tells every prospective visitor that nobody chose to be there. Physical goods have scarcity to protect their price floor. A banana that is going bad can still be sold at a discount because there is a finite supply of bananas and somebody will probably buy the discounted one. A digital live service game with a declining player base cannot be discounted into recovery because the problem is not price. The problem is that the social environment has dissolved. You cannot price your way back into relevance. And when it goes fast. And when it goes, the asset value of everything built, the engine, the content, the IP, the lore, the community tools, crashes to approximately zero. Not because the product is necessarily bad, but because the players left. And in a social product, players leaving is the product becoming bad. There is no distinction. Every financial model for a live service game assumes that throwing more resources at a production problem will accelerate outputs. This assumption is very wrong in a very specific and quantifiable way. In manufacturing, the relationship between labor and output is roughly linear. Double the assembly line workers, roughly double the production rate, accounting for coordination overhead. The math holds well enough to build a factory. In game development, the relationship is not linear. It follows what is known as what's known in software engineering as Brooks' law. Adding labor to a late software project makes it later. The reason for that is communication overhead. The number of communication channels in a team grows not linearly with team size, but quadratically. Specifically by the formula n times n minus 1 divided by 2. A team of 10 has 45 communication channels. A team of 20 has 190. A team of 50 has 1,225. Each of those channels is a potential point of misalignment, delay, and rework. The practical result is that doubling a game's development team often produces less than a 20% increase in actual production outputs. The coordination cost consumes the capacity gain. Major studios have learned this lesson repeatedly and expensively, and they keep learning it because the incentive to throw bodies at a problem is always present, and the quadratic communication cost is always invisible until it's already consuming the budget. And beyond the scaling problem, there is the tribal knowledge problem. A senior developer on a live service game doesn't just know their discipline, they know the specific engine, the tools, the technical debts, the workarounds, the specific decisions that made 3 years ago that nobody documented. If 10% of your team leaves through layoffs or burnout or the natural turnover that live service development produces at scale, the experience curve then resets. Production will stall for months while the new hires learn what the people who just left already knew. You cannot simply replace the labor. In the industries where large R&D investment makes economic sense, the investment amortizes across multiple products over an extended period. Toyota develops a vehicle platform and uses it across a decade of models across multiple brands. A pharmaceutical company develops a molecule and licenses it to multiple formations across multiple markets. The R&D cost is large, but it is spread across a revenue base that justifies the initial investment because the asset compounds in value over time. Game development R&D does not amortize this way. The technology stack, the engines, the tools pipeline, the asset creation infrastructure, the networking architecture, is frequently obsolete by the time the game ships. Development cycles for major life service titles now run regularly 5 to 7 years. The technical landscape changes substantially over that window. Unreal Engine updates, graphics APIs evolve, platform requirements shift. What was state of the art when you started development may be legacy infrastructure by the time you ship. And even when the technology holds up, it is bespoke. It was built for this specific game with this specific set of requirements for this specific content pipeline. It does not transfer cleanly to the next project. Every new live service game is, to a substantial degree, a new factory built from scratch to produce a single product line. The factory cost is entirely absorbed by that one product. There is no downstream amortization. This is the antithesis of industrial economics. The defining feature of industrialization is that capital investment compounds. Each investment makes subsequent investment more efficient. Game development, especially at the live service scale, does the opposite. Each project consumes its capital entirely and leaves the next project starting from approximately zero. The last structural problem in live service games as an investment thesis is the one that the macroeconomic of the last 3 years has made impossible to ignore. Games are luxury goods, not in the colloquial sense of expensive or premium. In the strict economic sense, goods with high income elasticity of demand. When household income drops, when inflation bites, when unemployment rises, when consumer confidence falls, discretionary spending on luxury goods falls faster than income falls. The income elasticity of demand is greater than 1, meaning a 10% drop in income produces more than a 10% drop in spending on the category. Games are among the most discretionary items in a household budget. They solve no utility problem. They can be delayed, reduced, or eliminated without any consequence to the household's functioning. In an economic downturn, they are often the first line items cut. The post-pandemic period demonstrated this in real time. COVID-era demand was exponential. It looked like permanent growth. It was not permanent growth. When the pandemic normalized, the live service project that had been greenlit on the assumption of permanently elevated demand suddenly found themselves competing for a contracting pool of leisure hours and leisure spending. Basically, the flight to quality that occurs in most sectors during a recession manifests in gaming as a flight to the 2 or 3 dominant live service titles. Fortnite survives a recession. The other live service does not. The macroeconomic for a live service title that isn't already dominant is essentially 0. So we're going to go back to the pitch deck. The pitch says we are building a live service game. Why is it not going to the next slide? Jesus Christ. The pitch says we are building a live service game. Reoccurring revenue. High LTV, scalable content model. Yik, yik, yak. What the pitch actually describes is that this is a product with no utility and therefore no switching costs. It is a constant operation with rising marginal costs rather than falling ones. A customer base where 1% of the users generate most of the revenue and can leave without warning. The only reason that the game industry is even called an industry is so that they don't actually get hit with the massive amounts of subprime loans and rate increases if they were to call themselves what they actually were. Let's say it like this, ladies and gentlemen. Where is it? There it is. If you walked into a bank and said, I would like to finance a hit-driven creative project with no utility or switching costs or amortizable R&D, a customer base governed by the social dynamics that I cannot model, and a total addressable market defined by the finite leisure hours of human beings, you would get a subprime rate at best. You would probably get shown the door. But if you walk in and say, I'm in the games industry, well, now you're an industry participant. The word industry is basically doing the work of a credit rating. It is taking what is structurally a speculative creative venture and reclassifying it as a going concern in an established sector. And that reclassification is worth billions of dollars in aggregate across every loan, every bond issuance, every fundraise, every acquisition multiple that has ever been applied to a games company. The word industry itself has a yield. If you like this video, guys, I'll see you guys next time. And like, comment, sub, share. If you made it to the end of the video, put a crying, laughing emoji, and then put a fire emoji, and then put a microphone emoji. Boom. All right, guys. See you guys next time. I hope you like this video, and peace out.